Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll be talking about optic neuritis diagnosis and management. Just like the current pandemic that we are going through, uh, optic neuritis management is something that we are still understanding even after 20, 25 years of treating this disease. So we'll try and see what we have available in front of us at the moment and how we are evolving in understanding this disease. So we'll talk about how to diagnose and manage optic neuritis. So optic neuritis per se means inflammation of the optic nerve, and you can have its presentation in the form of papillitis, where you would have disc edema, some vitreous cells overlying the disc, a very, very few splinter hemorrhages. So this is the classical papillitis appearance. The edema is not too severe, but you can see one or two splinter hemorrhages. You can see the margins are blurred, and there is a bit of edema. It's not a very extensive edema, and usually the edema is not very severe. On the other hand, you could have an absolutely normal fundus with all the clinical features of optic neuritis, and it would be termed as a retrobulbar neuritis. So the classical features or the classical teaching of optic neuritis would be that it is uniocular. It more often than not affects females, usually in the 20 to 45-year age group. Often painful visual loss, not very severe pain, mild, moderate pain, and the visual loss is over hours to days. So it's not a sudden loss of vision. The patient will say that he started losing vision and it took about a day or two for it to be at the stage at which he presents to us. The vision loss can be very subtle with just small field effects to a complete, virtually no PL vision. The vision loss will peak by around 2 weeks, and thereafter it would plateau or start improving. In unilateral cases, there is the presence of an RAPD, and in unilateral suspected optic neuritis, if you do not have RAPD, then you must seriously revisit your diagnosis of optic neuritis. And as said, the fundus appearance could be normal or would have papillitis. So the causes of optic neuritis would be broadly divided into three groups. One would be demyelinating, so it could be an isolated demyelinating optic neuritis. It could be associated with multiple sclerosis or a recent understanding over time of neuromyelitis optica or NMO. It could be infectious or para-infectious. It could be basically due to viral infections of various kinds, including bacterial, and tuberculosis in our country always forms a differential for any inflammation or any optic nerve disease that we see. And of course, there could be others like post-vaccination that we can see in children, and inflammatory associated with inflammatory diseases like sarcoid, SLE, PAN. So a lot of associated inflammatory diseases could also present with optic neuritis. However, most of the cases are idiopathic in nature and really no clear association can be picked up. The most important association that we have learned over time is the association of optic neuritis with multiple sclerosis. And it is a very key association because 50% of optic neuritis patients, of multiple sclerosis patients, will have optic neuritis sometime during their course of the disease, and in fact is the presenting feature in almost 20% of MS. So optic neuritis forms a very, very high component of patients who have or later on develop multiple sclerosis. And multiple sclerosis patients would tend to have recurrent optic neuritis involving the same or the fellow eye. So showing that the disease is not just one episode, but it's a progressive disease that can keep occurring, having a remission period and then remitting again. And that's how the disease process will continue. So there's another category that we have understood is called atypical optic neuritis. So the clinical features I talked about were typical, what you would call virtually associated with demyelinating optic neuritis. But we see this kind of an appearance or presentation with a wide variety of conditions. So presentations could be atypical in the form of sudden loss of vision. It could be absolutely painless or maybe associated with very severe pain. So all these are atypical. They're not what is characteristic seen in demyelinating optic neuritis, which we call as typical optic neuritis. In older patients, if there is bilateral involvement, is a very important atypical feature. very severe disc edema. Like the image I showed you, it is a very mild disc edema. So a severe disc edema raises a flag that it may not be a demyelinating optic neuritis. Significant disc hemorrhages and cottonwool spots. Progression of vision loss beyond 2 weeks or failure to stabilize or no improvement on giving IV steroids. Recurrent episodes and, like I mentioned, no RAPD in unilateral cases. So patients with atypical optic neuritis have a lower risk of developing multiple sclerosis, or essentially they are not associated with demyelinating optic neuritis. We need to think of the other causes like infective, compressive, and vascular like ischemic. So this is how we would see. So if a presentation, again, this is just based on the presentation. If it's a typical optic neuritis, the clinical features are typical. You have an isolated or idiopathic optic neuritis. It could be associated with multiple sclerosis, which will, as we will see, have very typical brain lesions on MRI. If the presentation is atypical, again, typical and atypical are based on their clinical presentations and give us an idea as to what could the possible etiology be. It does not mean that typical optic neuritis presentation may not have any of these possible causes or associations, or atypical optic neuritis may not be demyelinating in etiology. It is essentially that most likely typical is because of this, and atypical you start thinking about all these things and not just a demyelinating optic neuritis. So you have NMO spectrum disorders, which are now increasingly understood and are known to be fairly significant component in our country. Autoimmune, a chronic optic neuritis, which may have a recurrent course associated with a lot of autoimmune disorders, and you have reactive or post-infection or post-vaccination. So these are the clinical divisions of optic neuritis and their possible associations or possible etiologies, which will direct us towards our investigations and line of management. The broad differential diagnosis of papillitis or a disc edema, unilateral disc edema, would be a papilledema, asymmetric, or sometimes optic neuritis may also be bilateral, an arthritic ischemic optic neuropathy, a non-arthritic ischemic optic neuropathy, and a Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. We'll just run through gross differences in these differentials that we'll see, and we'll go on to see some images of the same. So we talked about the second to fourth decade for optic neuritis. Papilledema we know can occur at any age. The ischemic neuropathies are usually in the older age group, so above 40 or 45, usually described as 45, but in our country, because of increased diabetes and hypertension load among our population, we've seen it in above 40 also. So older age groups ischemic, and young males is Leber. So young males presenting in their late teens or early 20s, you would start thinking of Leber's. But of course, there's a huge overlap in all these presentations. Optic neuritis should usually be unilateral, papilledema would be bilateral, and all the others would be at least unilateral to start off with. Optic neuritis vision is very variable. You could have from absolutely normal vision with just a little field effect to no PL vision. And papilledema, usually vision is preserved in early stages. Ischemic neuropathies would have mild to moderate visual loss, whereas arthritic would have very severe visual loss. And Leber's would have a step ladder pattern of vision loss, so it may not be that bad to start off with, but over time there would be gradual progressive loss of vision. There is mild pain, especially on eye movements in optic neuritis. Papilledema would have severe headaches. The rest would have, again, very little pain, but arthritic may have jaw claudications or one-sided headache. Disc edema may not be there in optic neuritis. Papilledema, of course, that would be one of the important signs to see. Arthritic would have a pallid disc edema and sectoral disc edema in NAION, and Leber's may have initially a very mild edema, basically because of swelling of the nerve fibers and telangiectatic vessels. Visual fields could be of any type depending upon the involvement in optic neuritis. Papilledema would have initially blind spot enlargement and may progressively result in constriction of the field and may become very severe field effect if it is left untreated. Ischemic neuropathies would tend to have altitudinal field effects, and Leber's will present with a centrocecal defect. And associations of optic neuritis would be multiple sclerosis, NMO, autoimmune, and infectious, whereas papilledema would be space-occupying lesion or raised intracranial pressure. You would have arthritic associations with GCA and non-arthritic with a lot of systemic disorders. And Leber's has a mitochondrial disease as a cause for the Leber's hereditary neuropathy. So these are the most common differentials that we would keep in mind if we have a patient presenting with unilateral or bilateral disc edema with loss of vision. Just to show you photographs of the disc presentations, because sometimes the disc does tend to give us an idea of what's going on. So this is pseudopapilledema, a patient presenting, often young patient presenting with headaches off and on. We see this fundus and the patient is put through a lot of investigations, MRI, CSF tab, multiple investigations. If you see, the margins don't look sharp, but the vessels are very clear. There's no significant obscuration. There is no edema here that is going on to the rest of the retina. And it's a small disc. The disc is, there is no cupping. And the vessels you can see are very tortuous. So this is what we will see as pseudopapilledema. No hemorrhages, no exudates. Compare that with this, which is true papilledema. You can see the margins are blurred. You have splinter hemorrhages. You have edema that is going right up to the macula in both the cases because it's a very severe disc edema. You have exudates all over. And this is a hypertensive retinopathy. Again, mild blurring may be there, but you see all these lesions, lesions showing ischemia, splinter hemorrhages, they're removed from the disc. They're not directly connected. Whereas here, everything is connected to the disc. This is because of a hypertensive retinopathy. So a bilateral disc edema, this is your differentials. Acute optic neuritis, you can see the subtle or mild disc edema that is there, few splinter hemorrhages. This is ischemic optic neuropathy. You can see the disc edema is more sectoral, and over time it will create an inferior pallor. And this is the other eye which is showing a disc at risk. Small discs, no cupping, crowded in the middle. So this is a disc at risk. These are disc drusen's. You can see the bumpy, lumpy appearance that is described. And these are myelinated nerve fibers. So because of the myelin, the disc margins are absolutely obscured. So these are all the differentials that we need to keep in mind, and the appearance of the disc sometimes can give us an idea. Essential diagnosis of optic neuritis remains clinical. It will be based on the loss of visual acuity, the appearance of the fundus and the disc edema, the presence of a relative afferent pupillary defect, and of course, visual function deficit, which would include color and contrast, including mild involvement of the other eye, visual field defects, and VEPs that get prolonged. So increase in the latency of the VEP, and of course, an OCT, which is an emerging diagnostic tool, which is helping us to get some idea on the type of optic neuritis or disc edema that we are seeing. So if it is a typical presentation, you probably do not require any diagnosis, any investigations for diagnosis per se, initially, especially to start treatment. So essentially at our center, we would start with doing a chest X-ray and an electrolytes so that we can start the IV methylprednisolone, which we are understanding is now becoming an important intervention. Especially, it is important for us to diagnose and treat early. If the presentation is atypical, you can take a step back, take a breath, and try to understand the etiology. So you need to rule out infective and inflammatory etiologies, because sometimes if you just start by giving steroids, you may actually blur the picture and you may not be able to pick up a lot of the associated inflammatory etiologies. And later on, you will realize that this was due to some other cause and not just demyelinating. So you may require serology for syphilis, Bartonella, Toxoplasma, a MON2 test for tuberculosis. And of course, if there are associated symptoms, you may consider a blood culture, a CSF tap, and of course, other detailed examination of blood. So the other investigation now, which has a very, very significant role, is the role of an MRI. Ideally, we would say that MRI brain and orbits should be done in all patients of optic neuritis, irrespective of the fact whether they are presenting as typical or atypical. Unfortunately, because of the cost issues, sometimes we are not able to do that, and it becomes absolutely necessary. I mean, you need to insist on an MRI in the case of a recurrent optic neuritis, patients who are keen to know about long-term prognosis, patients with history or evidence of other neurological involvement in atypical cases, and in acute optic neuritis in children. So MRI becomes absolutely mandatory, although, like I said, it is probably an essential investigation in all patients. We need to do if you are suspecting multiple sclerosis in typical presentations, you need to do T2 weighted with FLAIR with gadolinium contrast. So MRI brain in orbits with contrast, you can just write in the bracket MS protocol, and the investigate and the radiologist would probably understand what we are looking for. If it's an atypical presentation, you may just start with an MRI with contrast because you suspecting compressive or inflammatory lesions. Again, inflammatory lesions, you need a contrast to be able to delineate the inflamed part of the brain on orbits. And if you are suspecting there are history of spine-related symptoms, if NMO is a thought, then MRI spine also gets added onto this. So MRI is a strong indicator for us to suspect multiple sclerosis, and it helps us to prognosticate or get an idea of how many patients may go on to develop multiple sclerosis. So at the time of clinical presentation, if the MRI shows even one, for that matter, white matter lesions, then there is a very high risk of clinically definitive multiple sclerosis developing in this patient. And it's important in typical optic neuritis for us to be able to anticipate the progression to multiple sclerosis, because MS in the long term can be very disabling, and therefore it's important to know from the beginning, because there is now available disease modifying drugs that can delay the onset of severe multiple sclerosis and disabling lesions in them. So ONTT was a landmark study for optic neuritis. They had 3 groups: placebo, oral steroids, and IV methylprednisolone given for 11 days. And the study showed that IV methylprednisolone gives a faster recovery, although in the long term there is no significant difference in the final visual outcome. Although oral steroids had a 2 times greater risk of recurrence, therefore oral steroids in the conventional doses are not as taken as a first-line treatment of optic neuritis. And the most important predictor was MRI, which showed that if there were no lesions, then the chance of multiple sclerosis was only 25%. But even if there was 1 lesion at the time of presentation, it was almost 3 times the risk of developing multiple sclerosis. So the recommendations became that IV methylprednisolone should be given at least 1 gram, should be given at least for 3 days. Oral prednisolone is contraindicated. We had been initially giving dexamethasone as an alternative. Now, of course, prednisolone is widely available and the cost is less. So we have also now long-term moved to methylprednisolone. So the importance of identifying multiple sclerosis in the beginning is because we have now the availability of disease-modifying agents. Of course, this has to be given in association with a neurologist. And we have seen over a lot of studies and clinical experience that these disease-modifying agents can actually help to delay the progression to multiple sclerosis and the presence of disabling disease. It has shown reduced relapses over 30% over 2 years, and of course has shown a reduction in the MRI lesions. And these have now become a standard of care for managing optic neuritis, which has a risk of going on to multiple sclerosis, and of course management of multiple sclerosis. Now, I just put an idea of how we evolved our learning in India. In India, we realized when we did a study, and we realized everybody who was treating these patients realized that there was a lot more papillitis as compared to RBN. We had a few cases, a fair amount, more than the ONTT described, of bilateral cases. Vision loss may be painless and very, very severe to start off with. The outcomes were not as good as being reported in the Western population, and we did not see so many brain MRI lesions. And somehow the progression to MS was less common than was reported from the West. And this was a comparison, and we found that it was much closer to the Asian population like Taiwan and Japan studies as compared to the ONTT. You could see papillitis being much more common, MS being much lower as compared to the ONTT, and bilaterality being much more than what the ONTT actually, in fact, ONTT did not take bilateral cases, but what has been reported in the West. So over time we understood, and over time the understanding has been that we were missing out patients of opticospinal form of MS. And these, because of the presence of NMO antibodies, are now termed as NMO. And it has been seen that almost 10% of patients presenting with optic neuritis, in fact, in some studies up to 20% in India, are NMO patients and not just typical demyelinating optic neuritis. So they form what we understand now as NMO or neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorders. They may present with severe bilateral optic neuritis, and transverse myelitis, which may not be simultaneously, may occur up to a year or more after the initial presentation of optic neuritis. In many studies, there has been variable reports of NMO, but the most authentic or the most well-reported was by Pandit et al., which has reported about 9.5 to 10% NMO for all neurological lesions suspected to be MS. And the key understanding we have gained over time is because of the presence of an antibody-mediated disorder of the CNS. So it's an autoimmune disorder. You have an antibody that is attacking parts of the optic nerve in the brain, resulting in the involvement. So you have bilateral involvement, you have recurrent optic neuritis, you have very severe visual loss, which does not recover. You have MRI changes which are not typical of MS. You have CSF showing significant pleocytosis, and you have what will be associated autoimmune diseases because it is part of an autoimmune mediated disorder. So this is an increasing understanding that we are seeing. What we realized that over the past 15 or 20 years, we were identifying and separating out patients who were not doing so well were probably the missed NMO, which were being labeled as optic neuritis or MS. So while MS still remains the most likely diagnosis, or demyelinating optic neuritis with or without MS remains the most likely diagnosis for most of the patients, up to 80% of our patients presenting with typical optic neuritis, we would have over time a percentage of patients who would actually be NMO positive and would have problems of recurrences, would have problems of severe visual loss, which does not recover. So these are important understandings over time of our management of optic neuritis, and we'll just see how management has changed. So NMO, one of the ways, and again, that's why over time, earlier we used to say MRI may not be helpful or may not be necessary, only if you want to prognosticate about multiple sclerosis. But now, because MRI has now been helping us to identify NMO, or at least give us a suggestion whether it's NMO or typical optic neuritis with or without risk of MS. So that is why MRI with brain and orbits, and if required, spinal cord, has become a virtually mandatory investigation in any patient presenting with an optic neuritis. So we've seen brain lesions corresponding to regions where we see high aquaporin 4 expression. So aquaporin 4 is a water-gated channel protein there against which antibodies are generated. More of these are seen in the hypothalamus and the brainstem. So you see a lot of brainstem spinal cord lesions in NMO patients. And because of that, coexisting spinal cord lesions, which are relatively long vertebral involvements, MRI spine has also become one of the important investigations to do to pick up NMO early. And it's very important from a management perspective to pick up NMO early. So, like I said, if a patient presents with optic neuritis or suspected optic neuritis, and an MRI brain and orbits with contrast becomes a very important investigation. Not only does it help us to prognosticate a typical optic neuritis about the possibility of developing multiple sclerosis, and of course the requirement of disease modifying agents in such a patient, but also the possibility that we may be dealing with a variant which is NMO and may be requiring a much more aggressive intervention than just giving steroids and following up. So the treatment of acute NMO becomes far more aggressive than what we used to understand or manage with multiple sclerosis. And in an acute attack, you must give high-dose methylprednisolone. So 1 gram are given often up to 5 days, depending upon the severity of the attack and the severity of vision loss and the speed at which vision recovers. So that's why, again, we have now a very high reflex for giving methylprednisolone unless you are suspecting infectious or inflammatory, in which case you would first do the investigation and then start steroids. In patients who do not improve adequately with high-dose methylprednisolone and you are suspecting NMO, or the NMO test comes positive, or the MRI is highly suggestive of NMO, you may even require a plasma exchange to actually stop the attack and further visual loss. For the further prevention of for further attacks, you require immunosuppressive therapies and, of course, disease-modifying agents, which are used for preventing development of multiple sclerosis are actually contraindicated because we have seen that giving disease modifying agents actually increases the recurrences in NMO. So again, the importance of trying to identify NMO early. MRI helps us, and wherever possible, we need to do the NMO antibody test to confirm, especially if the presentation is atypical. Atypical presentation, you need to understand whether it is an NMO or it's an infectious or inflammatory disease. And then our worry about MS is less, and we are actually more worried about NMO and other diseases. The other syndrome that is coming up is a MOG IgG associated optic neuritis. So MOG is basically damage to myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein. So MOG is another variant that we are seeing. A lot of cases, not very high, but a percentage of cases we are understanding are MOG, and they present with optic neuritis, with encephalitis, with brain demyelinating lesions, and acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. So it is not just optic neuritis to start off with. Again, MRI may help us to identify a more widespread disease in the brain, which may be subclinical at the moment. But again, MOG will present with recurrent optic neuritis. So a patient with recurrent optic neuritis may require an evaluation for MOG and require MOG antibody testing so that we are able to identify MOG per se and separate it from multiple sclerosis. It tends to have much better prognosis than NMO and may have bilateral or multiple recurrences. So again, our understanding is evolving for MOG. As we understand the disease and clinical presentations, our treatment will get better. So as I said, the MRI is a key investigation. It helps us in the beginning to differentiate. So MS usually will have unilateral involvement. There will be enhancement of the nerves in the retrobulbar and the intracanalicular lesion. Brain in associated multiple sclerosis will have periventricular ovoid lesions that would be juxtacortical, and very rarely is spine involved. And if it is involved, they are very short segment involvement. So one vertebral length involvement is all you would see in multiple sclerosis. Whereas NMO will have large tract involvement of the optic nerve and the chiasma. The brain lesions will be widespread, particularly in the areas of the hypothalamus and the brainstem, where there is high aquaporin 4 expression, and you would have very large vertebral involvements of the cervical and the thoracic spine. So long segment involvement spread over 3 or more vertebral segments. In MOG, you may have a perineural enhancement, and the lesions would be there in the lower cord, and they may not be very long or very extensive as you see in NMO. So this is what we will see. So if you see multiple sclerosis, you will have a short segment enhancement. For NMO, you'll see long segment enhancement, including involvement of the chiasma, and MOG may have a perineural enhancement also, and often bilateral, as MOG can be a bilateral presentation. You can see the periventricular plaques in multiple sclerosis, whereas in the NMO, you will see the brainstem, the spinal cord in the cervical and the thoracic region. So these are the ways in which an early MRI may help us to differentiate and identify what we may be dealing with. So if you have optic neuritis typical features, ophthalmic investigations and MRI, you start IV steroids, improvement, you follow up. So your management decides, your MRI will decide your long-term management. You give IV methylprednisolone, patient improves. Depending upon the MRI, if there are multiple lesions on the brain, you may consider discussing with a neurologist for long-term disease-modifying agents. If MRI is normal, you may just opt to follow up the patient, and if it recurs, then decide or discuss for disease-modifying agents. The important thing is disease-modifying agents are still very expensive, and we are not very sure how long we need to keep giving. At least the treatment may last up to 2 years or more. So that is why sometimes in isolated optic neuritis and the MRI being normal, we may just follow up the patient. But this is if there is typical presentation and the MRI is absolutely normal. After treatment with IV methylprednisolone, the patient improves. So you may consider following up. However, if there is no significant improvement on steroids, or if the patient has atypical presentation, you must do a detailed history and clinical examination. You may require MRI brain and orbits to see for NMO MOG, may require an MRI spine, serology markers for NMO and MOG, CSF analysis if you suspect infection, and of course an immune profile understanding. And the management will depend upon what you are getting in your investigations. You have a lot of treatment options, as I discussed, for optic neuritis. You start off virtually universally, unless it's infective, with IV methylprednisolone. In NMO, you consider plasma exchange, and IV immunoglobulins are now being discussed and used for multiple sclerosis related optic neuritis. The long-term management is interferons for multiple sclerosis, immunosuppressants like azathioprine or even methotrexate or mycophenolate mofetil for NMO, and monoclonal antibodies are being developed and are newer on the block for understanding our management of both MS and NMO. And these are some things that are coming up: regeneration therapy for the nerve to regenerate, to remyelinate, and for improvement, you have these options that are still being tried and are under investigation. So I'll just come with the final management. You have acute optic neuritis, which is if it is MS or isolated optic neuritis, acute episode, the MRI is normal, you give IV steroids, and basically you follow up the patient, and then you worry about repeated MRIs and MS if there is a relapse. You may discuss long-term MS with patients who are worried or who have a family history, or there is a subtle risk that they've had previous episodes. You may discuss about long-term therapy and prevention of or delaying onset of MS. However, if the MRI is suspicious of MS, after IV steroids, you must seriously discuss the role of interferons in these patients to prevent their progression to multiple sclerosis. If the presentation is atypical, you would more often than not, especially if it's NMO, more often than not require IV steroids. If it improves, you may follow up with oral steroids for a very gradual taper over months, and may require immunosuppressants, particularly in NMO. If there is no improvement in a patient with NMO suspect on IV steroids, you may require plasma exchange or IV gamma globulins, and may require a very long-term oral steroid therapy, which may gradually be supplanted by immunosuppressants. So this is in broad the management that we are now understanding in a patient of optic neuritis, and we realize that over time our interventions in the form of an urgent MRI and aggressive IV methylprednisolone therapy has increased. But again, it is not indiscriminate, and in this current scenario where now steroids, we are learning with the current pandemic, we are learning may have side effects. So it's always important to remember that IV methylprednisolone is associated with significant short-term side effects. Definitely, if you give such high dose 1 gram methylprednisolone, so you need to give it very slowly over half an hour to 45 minutes. You need to admit the patient, or at least keep him under observation you for at least 2 hours after the IV has been given. While the patient is getting IV, you need to keep a pulse oximeter, or if possible an ECG on the patient, because we know they have dyselectrolytemias. Baseline, you need to get a chest x-ray, need to do electrolytes, because though rarely, we have seen some of the patients given IV methylprednisolone actually later on go on to develop tuberculosis. So you must rule out tuberculosis in patients. You must rule out baseline electrolyte imbalances in patients. You must rule out cardiac arrhythmias in these patients, because IV methylprednisolone, if unmonitored, has been known to even cause death. So it's very, very important that we do not take this treatment lightly. Although we have become aggressive in our intervention, but no aggression is acceptable without taking due precaution. So always see the clinical picture of the patient, always understand the cause. In the very beginning, we gave the differentials of ischemic optic neuropathy. So always in an older patient presenting first time with what you suspect as optic neuritis, remember that especially if a patient is diabetic or has other systemic disorders, hyperlipidemia, the likelihood that it may actually be ischemic is more than optic neuritis. Although NMO does present in an older age group, so 40 to 50 may be the initial presentation of a patient of NMO, but based on percentage and likelihood, it is very, very low. So an older patient, keep ischemic in mind, because by giving IV steroids to a patient who has baseline diabetes, you may actually worsen the diabetes, and of course, the side effects of IV steroids can be significant. So again, the treatment has now become more aggressive, but so has the responsibility on our shoulders to ensure that we investigate and diagnose appropriately, or at least have a clear differential in mind and plan our management accordingly. So to conclude, optic neuritis may be isolated or part of a multiple sclerosis syndrome. If there are atypical features, we need to investigate for the cause, make sure what we are dealing with. Consider NMO and MOG, especially NMO, as aggressive treatment is important. We know that if NMO is not treated early, the long-term visual prognosis is very poor and a large number of patients may actually become blind. Baseline MRI is essential. It helps to predict MS and helps us to diagnose or suspect other causes. Steroids in the form of IV methylprednisolone helps to speed recovery. However, that is not the end of the treatment. You need to discuss and manage in association with a neurologist or a physician so that you are able to give long-term treatment. And disease-modifying agents may reduce the pace of development of multiple sclerosis. It is contraindicated in NMO, which requires aggressive and long-term management to prevent severe visual loss in these patients. Thank you very much, both to KGMU for the opportunity, and of course to everybody who's attending for the opportunity and to be here and listen to me. Thank you very much.